This video is brought to you by my supporters on Patreon.
All my life I've been deceived. People told me I could be anything beyond the sea. All you need is to believe.
Hi guys, I'm here with another one of my Widowmaker worklog videos, and this time I am working on her gun. All of these patterns can be found on my Patreon page, exclusive to patrons of a certain tier. So here I'm just finishing up the barrels, and for the barrels I used PVC pipes of 2 different sizes, and then wrapped one in craft foam to make it fit better, as well as added a couple layers of craft foam rings to either end of both barrels in order to make it so that the barrels didn't slide off or completely just fall off of one another.
Run into the sea. Follow this heart that escapes me. It escapes me.
So I cut out the base of the gun in insulation foam, and now I'm just going through and adding all the tunnels that I will need in order to string the lights through it and put in the barrels. So I'm just tracing a couple more details onto the base of the gun that need to be cut out, and then cutting those out. I'm also widening the area where the barrel needs to go, as well as finishing the piping, or whatever you want to call it, for where the lights are going to go. Here I'm taking my pattern and cutting it down to its different layers, and then tracing all of those out onto the base of the gun so that I can use them for future reference and make sure everything is laid down in the correct place when I add the other layers.
Maybe we're better off this way, but I'm still forgetting me. All I was and become everything. All I wanted.
Areas are slightly larger than they needed to be, but I go ahead and fix those up later once I have both of the pieces glued together to make sure that everything is even. Here I'm just coating the inside with a couple layers of wood glue just to kind of smooth it out a little bit more and make it a little bit more sturdy, as well as allow me to later hot glue things into place. So now I am taking my lights and stringing those throughout the pathways that I have carved out for them and gluing those into place.
I just want you. I just want you.
Every once in a while, I do check the lights like you kind of saw there real fast, just to make sure that they are still working correctly.
Then you, I'm losing you. Oh, but these thoughts won't let you go. They keep running back to you.
So the layout, I slightly changed the way I laid some lights, or they weren't laid exactly how I had originally been planned, which meant some of the strings were a bit shorter than I wanted them to be, and so you can just see me here cutting some of those, and I will go in and add a wire to lengthen them later. Once I glued everything together using foam board glue and let that completely dry, I went ahead and started carving out all of the edges that were uneven or larger than the other side, just trying to even everything up and make it cleaner and to the exact shape and design that I needed it to be.
And I'm bleeding words. They escape me, the recoil it hurts. And I can't look the other way.
I used two different thicknesses of foam and traced out the different layers that my pattern had onto those according to how thick I need those different pieces to be. Then I just cut those out and get those ready to be glued onto the base layer of the gun.
And we won't always free fall back to nothing. 'Cause I'm just starting to learn. I've always been chasing.
So here I am just gluing on the pieces that we just cut out, and this specific piece is the part where her little scope dealio thing will sit. For any of the cut out areas where the lights are supposed to shine through, I take a transparent red folder, cut out a little rectangle, and glue that on top of it before gluing the craft foam layer down. A quick note is to remember or take note of the fact that hot glue can and will probably eat through insulation foam, so a way to kind of get around that or have it be more safe or insulation foam friendly is to glue directly onto the craft foam rather than the insulation foam and use a low temperature glue gun.
I was fine when you pulled me down. You said the stars would answer. You said our prayers were written down. I was fine when you pulled me in. We were forced to be human, and then the world came after, and I had never questioned it. And they said it was wrong. But we started
I use a soldering iron to add little details to various pieces and various parts of the gun. And right here I'm gluing on these bolts onto these little lever things. I don't really know what they're called. Forgive me, I'm not really a gun knowledgeable person, so if I call them thingamabobs and doodads, that's the best I got. I'm also using a soldering iron to kind of melt down this area where her W is rather than try to carve it out or something. And then I use a Dremel to just try to smooth out that area a bit more, since a soldering iron can leave these kind of bumpy textures. So right here I'm gluing pieces of her scope doodad thing, I think that's what it is, together, and then gluing those around a PVC pipe in order to create the barrel or round shape that it has before I glue it into place on the gun. That giant hole is where the battery pack goes, so around it I am gluing Velcro strips into place because it will have a covering that is detachable. And you will see me cut out a chunk of EVA foam in a second and then cover that, or at least one side of it, in Velcro and make it to fit the area. Here I'm just gluing on more layers onto the gun. These specific layers, like the two that I'm gluing on right here, I used a heat gun to kind of give a little shape to. So for this little rainbow shaped piece that sits in front of her scope, or maybe this is the scope, I don't know, I'm cutting holes in it at either end so that I can stick this little bar through in order to allow it to turn. And here I'm just gluing on resin pieces to either part or either side of the scope piece, as well as finishing off the different layers that it has and gluing those in place. I cut bolts out of EVA foam that sit on the bottom of that little rainbow piece thing that I'm calling. That's what I'm calling. Anyways, I'm gluing those into place on to either end of the bar in order to allow the thing to continue to move. Here I'm sanding down and smoothing out the edges along the top and bottom pieces that sit at the front of her gun. I'm also cutting it shorter as needed to make sure that it fits correctly. And now I'm sanding down those little bolt lever pieces, and this takes a long time because there's so many. Once those have been sanded down, I glue them into place, attaching them to all of those little nooks that both the top and bottom pieces have. Use a reference photo to understand what I'm talking about. The top half is basically the same thing as the bottom half, except for it has a little cutout at the very front where this little light piece sits out. Once all of those are glued to the top and bottom pieces, I glue the other end of them onto the gun into the correct spots. Because the little pieces are foam, they allow me to be able to move the top pieces in, up and down like her gun does in the game, and not have to work in some fancy mechanic because I just didn't know how to do that. And here I am just using a soldering iron to add in more details. To make this end look more neat and even and kind of hide that uneven circle that I got going on, I just cut out a piece of EVA foam or crafting foam and then glue that into place and cut it to fit it as best as I can and hide all that messiness. For this little bottom doodad that she has going on, I used a empty toilet paper roll and then added on craft foam pieces and glued all of that into place. And here I am just gluing the lights into place around the underside of the rainbow shaped piece. To get it ready for priming and painting, I am taking painter's tape and cutting out really small pieces and covering all of the really small red pieces or red areas where the lights are, where we put that transparent folder at. Yeah, that, covering all of those to make sure that they don't get paint or like wood glue or something on them. As well as around any lights that just may be sticking out because I don't want to spray paint over the lights. Once all of that is done, I am coating everything in a couple layers of wood glue. After a couple layers of wood glue, I go ahead and apply a layer of Bondo around the edges, and I will do this a few times until everything is as smooth as possible. I'm pretty sure you're not supposed to just use your bare finger for this, so don't follow what I'm doing. You're supposed to use like a popsicle stick or at least gloves, so do that instead.
Can't look the other way. I'm chasing starlight to find a style away. Breathe it in. It's just now. We're just falling.
After each layer of Bondo, once it is dry, I sand it down using a fine grit sandpaper.
Back to
After a couple more layers of wood glue, I began to paint everything. Here I've already spray painted everything I needed to spray paint blue, and I'm just now covering all of those pieces up with painter's tape. I'm reusing old pieces of painter's tape that I had just used on other pieces of her armor and such. After everything is covered, I just go ahead and spray paint all of the other colors, which I believe is gray, and then I use acrylic paint in the paintbrush to add in all of the black pieces. This is all I have as far as the gun part goes. So thanks for watching. I hope you guys found this helpful. Check out other videos of my work log and have a lovely day.